So in my city, I think it's around about 3% would be attending church on a Sunday of 1.6 million people. You go to Scotland, I think it's less than 3%.
Wow.
If church attendance is less than 3%, or the number of Christians in a country is less than 3%, it's an official unreached people group.
Wow.
And when you think, John Knox, give me Scotland all right now.
Yeah. He's still longing for that.
He's still longing for that.
Right. Guys, welcome to the Grimké podcast. So thankful to be with you guys today. I'm here with Dr. Doug Ponder, as always, and our Dean of Grimké Europe.
Great to be here. Great to be here. Thank you.
Steve Robinson. Yeah. Good. We got a small conversation we want to have today. Basically, it's just to have a good conversation about, how's the church doing in the UK. So off to the races.
Off to the races.
Off to the races.
You've got to jump in on that. If the question is how's the church in the UK and anybody else jumps in.
Yeah, we can jump in.
Well,
stateside, we know we have great love for the UK and all the churches, and we know there's a great need for the gospel to go forth there. And so, something that obviously we're passionate about and long to see happen. So how are things going?
You know what, bro? I think it's interesting. I'm sitting here in Richmond with you guys talking about the church in the UK, and I think it's interesting when you think about the amount of blessings that have come historically over the last 200 or 300 years from faithful men, faithful leaders, in the context of theology that's poured into the life of the United States. And I've had the privilege of spending so much time over here. Over the last 10, 15 years, and often people are saying, "Oh, I'm thankful for this guy, I'm thankful for this person," people that we all know.
Oh, that's right.
And on one level, I think it's that's wonderful. So and obviously in the UK, we feel the benefits of that as well. Obviously, and if anything, we're grounded in those things. But I guess also when you look at it at the face of it, I reckon the sort of the fruit of the ministry of those pastors, theologians that have gone before us doesn't seem to be as fruitful, I guess, as it has been in recent years. So I think as you see it on the face of it, you could probably say the church within the UK is struggling in some sense.
Yeah. A lot of great fruit, but obviously, being there many times now, you see the rich Western heritage of the church.
Absolutely.
And real ways. All the beautiful church buildings, all the architecture, all the grand history, all the expansion of the gospel of the U.S. And that's been over centuries now.
That's right. And it's embedded into our culture.
Right.
To the point where you don't even see it. You don't even notice it because it affects everything, the way we function, the way we engage, the way our calendar is, the way things flow out. And it's so part of who we are, the culture of hundreds, thousands of years of the influence of the gospel in light of everything is there.
Yeah.
But I guess answering the question, to your question, how things are happening at the moment, there are things that you look and you could be really discouraged.
Sure. Yeah.
Really, really discouraged. But at the same time, you look and I just see so many evidences of God's grace through the church, Bible believing, gospel preaching churches.
Yeah.
On a backdrop of apparent darkness, you just see this shards of light and the brightness of the gospel happening. So on one level, I'm answering the question with, it's discouraging.
Sure.
But also really encouraging at the same time.
Yeah. Well, we were just recently, just a month or two ago, at the FIEC conference in Blackpool.
Yeah, it's great.
First time I'd been there.
The conference was great. Blackpool.
It was
interesting.
It was an experience. Memorable.
Memorable is the word, yeah.
Doug, I hope you get to go there.
No doubt. FIEC, remind me.
Yes. The Fellowship of Independent Evangelical Churches.
Right. So in the UK, obviously, Anglican Church, official church of the state.
Yes.
So been around a long time and sort of the older brother. But so what function does FIEC fill in a place like the UK?
So the FIEC, I think it started just over 100 years ago. And it was for churches that are convictionally hold to the autonomy of the local church.
Right.
The autonomy of the local church in the context of a particular area, but obviously recognized that we are not islands. We can't function on our own. And that interdependency of working together, the word fellowship, I guess, is used to work together to reach the nation with the gospel. So for 100 years now, the FIEC has existed. So it's made up of independent churches, gospel independent evangelical churches that are seeking to work together in a interdependence, but still hold to the autonomy of the local church. And we were there. There was 1,000 people at the conference. 1,000 people represent about 700 churches.
Oh, it was amazing.
Wow. It was amazing.
Pastors, leaders, men and women from all the churches, 1,000 plus singing, worshiping, hearing the scriptures, great joy. So there's a lot, like you said, charge of light. Those churches are thriving and doing well and preaching the gospel and that sort of thing.
And a lot of encouragement in the sense that obviously we've been part of the FIEC for pretty much the whole time that we've existed as a church. And just to see the growth of that and the number of people that I've got to know over that time. You know, I've been in ministry for 20 years.
Right.
So seeing other brothers that are leading churches and their churches are growing and people are being saved. So those sorts of times are a real encouragement.
Yeah.
But I think also the temptation can be when you think there's 1,000 leaders, 700 churches. There's millions and millions of people that live in the UK.
Right. Yeah.
And
65 million?
65-ish million. Most of them would live down towards London and in the south. So when you look at the blankets of the UK, the amount of communities and cities that are in desperate need of the gospel is enormous. Is enormous. And the culture has changed. You know, when I was growing up in the 80s, and I know from speaking to my parents in a place like Liverpool, which was a very religious city, there was lots of Roman Catholic, a big Roman Catholic community because of the Irish migration from the potato famine. But also where you find a Roman Catholic community, there's also a really strong Protestant community in contrast to that. So there were lots of churches, brethren halls, gospel halls, everywhere. So most of the generations coming through for the last 150, 200 years would have some sort of concept of the gospel. Yeah. Of God, of Jesus, of the Bible stories. Kids were sent to Sunday school, and Sunday school in the UK was an afternoon session for children. Yeah. At 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So right up to when I was a kid, into the 80s, early 90s, people were sent to Sunday school because parents wanted a couple of hours on their own. So you had this wonderful work amongst children where people were being saved. So my dad got saved when he was 14 years of age. Real influx of young men in the 14, 15, 16s, in the 60s and 70s who come to know the Lord Jesus. Yeah. And now that, they're in their 70s now and serving and some of them are pastors and doing different things. But what has happened in that is the influence of the church, the influence of gospel churches is less and less and less and less and less. And that's with the increase of a secular society, a secular culture. Right. People don't send their kids to church anymore. Sunday school stopped in one sense. Yeah. There was an influence in the light of the school. So I grew up, we had assemblies every day. The Lord's Prayer, we all said the Lord's Prayer. The assemblies were times of worship. That just doesn't happen anymore in the same way. So what we've got is we've got a culture in the UK, and it will look different in each of the different countries, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. It will look slightly different. But what we have is a culture that is shaped by Christianity and the gospel, and the church has had an enormous influence on what that looks like, and we know that from history. But we have people living in that culture who just see the church as totally insignificant in the culture that we find ourselves in, which can be really, really discouraging and hard graft in particular areas. And there are lots of small churches that are struggling, in need of revitalization and replanting. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of gatherings of people that call themselves churches that aren't great.
Aren't doing well.
Causing more problems than.
It seemed to be, that was my first time at the FIEC, but it seemed to be a lot of self-awareness.
Very much
so the church being a lot smaller overall. Yep. You can see that there was a lot of self-awareness of there is a great need and we need to. So there's a lot of rich fraternity, a lot of rich love for one another, a lot of shared experience because like you said, we were talking before we sat down, what are the overall numbers in terms of church attendance and that sort of thing? Just by comparative, it's not It's not that
There's
much.
a guy named Ryan Burge. He's a sociologist in America, and he was ranking the U.S. states by weekly attendance. This is of any church. So Unitarian Universalist churches would count. The most liberal Protestant churches would count. Catholic churches would count, and so on. But
they're counting more than count than actually count.
yeah. They're being counted in the survey. Let's put it like that. Yeah, whether Jesus counts them or not, that's a different question. But the lowest state in the U.S. by weekly church attendance is New Hampshire at 12%, which is the same number that you see in the UK.
Yeah.
So for Americans who may be watching this video and wondering, when we say that the UK is a lot more secular now, I wonder if Americans even have the sense that it's quite like that, because we do think about these people that we know, John Stott. We think about Martin Lloyd-Jones. We think about J.I. Packer.
Yeah.
I know he came to the U.S., but we think about C.S. Lewis, John Webster, if you want to go, theologians. And we think about these people that were British and have deeply influenced American evangelicalism. And maybe we have this sense, or you see the buildings on TV, or Canterbury the Cathedral, or when the king was coronated, right? And there's all these religious aspects of the ceremony. It can feel like, man, the UK, it's got a lot going on. Well, not in terms of weekly attendance. It's on par with the lowest weekly attendance in the US. So that's the level that we're talking about.
And you had mentioned those, even those need clarification.
Yeah, and even that, well, I think what's interesting, the 12%, of that 12%, a lot of the people attending will be those that have come to the UK. So
emigrated there?
Emigrated there. So I know, like Poland, for example, I think it's 44%, it says in that study, does it?
Okay.
So 44%. And there was a large influx of Polish people into the UK over the last 20 years that brought the increase in church attendance, specifically in Roman Catholic churches, up quite a bit, especially in larger cities likes of London. And because we are such a multiracial international country, the influences that are coming and missionaries that are coming from different parts of the world to reach the UK, but also to reach their people group within the UK, causes those to increase. Now, there will be probably a larger attendance in London, but if you go to some of the other cities around, especially in the north, in Wales and in Scotland, that percentage is a lot lower. So in my city, I think it's around about 3% would be attending church on a Sunday. Of the whole area, about 1.5, 1.6 million people. You go to Scotland, I think it's less than 3%.
Oh, wow.
And if you are, if church attendance is less than 3%, or the number of Christians in a country is less than 3%, it's an official unreached people group.
Wow.
And when you think, John Knox, give me Scotland all right now.
Yeah.
He's
still longing for that.
He's still longing for that.
Right.
He is there, and less than 3%. So, and I think you look at those numbers, and in light of what you're saying, to your point, you can also look at the TV that we're a religious Christian country, and the traditions that are found there, when the reality is so different.
Yeah.
But I think what's really encouraging in light of that, from my experience of the last 20 years of being in church leadership, we're also working and watching and engaging with other brothers that are leading ministries around us, that there is real traction in specific sort of areas and in niches,
right,
where people are trying to reach. And I think what we've found is, as in one sense the church has got smaller, even though there is growth within gospel preaching churches, as it's got smaller and the secular influence seems to be getting bigger, therefore it feels darker culturally. Churches, like independent churches within the FIEC, Evangelical Alliance, which is another, a little bit broader, but another big network. And then obviously our gospel brothers and sisters in the Anglican Church as well. This need to work together, this interdependency. And that's happening in local areas, whether in different cities or around specific niches. And I think as we're working together, congregations of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, serving and supporting each other, the influence in the different cities and communities is starting to increase. So let me give you one example. A couple of examples from the UK, because I think this is what I find hopeful. Find hopeful that we believe in the autonomy of the local church in the context of where we are, elders leading the church. but working together is so important. We see Scotland would be a great example with 20 schemes, a niche looking to reach people who are living in schemes which would be council estates projects, I guess.
Yeah, projects over
projects
here,
would be here in the US, and specifically planting churches with indigenous people in those communities and recognizing that this is going to be long, it's going to be small, and committing to 20, 30, 40 years of being in communities. And also working together, recognizing that you may see, 20, 30 people come to know Jesus in that particular community, but they won't financially be able necessarily to support the church. So therefore, we've got to think creatively of how we work together. And 20 Schemes has done a great job of that. There are others that are happening in Birmingham and Manchester. I lead the Cornerstone Collective, which is very similar as well for the Merseyside area. And one of the things that I'm seeing and I'm engaging with conversations is different church leaders are saying, how can we work better together, either in small localities all around the niche area, to support and encourage, see more people come to know Jesus. And what's interesting is, I think where that's happening, people are being saved.
Yeah.
I think where it's happening, people are seeing working together, shared resources, to see more people come to know the Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's, you look at numbers, you see stuff, you feel certain things, but you see these, I use this phrase all the time, evidences of God's grace, shards of light in the darkness,
right.
which is a wonderful opportunity. And the other thing is this, because of the move, I think, from the UK being culturally Christian, we are reaching people and engaging with people who have never heard the gospel before, like ever. Don't know anything about God, know anything about Jesus. We don't have to deconstruct in the right sense to show them actually what you are rejecting is not what the Bible is saying.
Right.
Actually, what we show them, and it's brand new news to people. So we're seeing that, in Liverpool specifically, and I know this to be true around the country, men and women, and a number of men, especially, getting saved in their late 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Yeah.
And I think that the influx of there's been an increase in that, especially after times like COVID and the different disillusionment.
Yeah.
I actually think a real influx of real negativity towards men in our culture has caused them to wake up and say, hang on, what is this? And, the truth of the gospel helps that. So we're seeing so much fruit in those areas that actually gives me real hope.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. It's wonderful to be part of that and thinking about what it looks like to see people saved, churches working together, planting churches, raising up men for ministry, pastoral ministry specifically.
Yeah, I mean, we should always be hopeful as God's people.
Absolutely.
So as we have the hope of the gospel, and we know the end of the story. So, but all challenges, as they always say too, are actually opportunities.
Absolutely.
So I mean, you mentioned, some of them now. I mean, so why don't we talk through how the church meets those challenges as opportunities? What are some things that the church needs to be mindful of? You mentioned one, which is great. You don't have to deconstruct a bad version of Christianity. You're actually sharing, for some folks who have never heard the gospel at all, don't know the scripture, is very illiterate in terms of the Christian faith, period. And then you're starting with that assumption so that when you're sharing with them, your discipleship and everything accords with meeting them where they're at. What are some other things that the church maybe needs to be mindful of, you think, as we move forward in hope?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm observing, and just from my own ministry in Liverpool, has been that moving away from this idea of seeker-sensitive stuff. I was very much, I said, influenced from this side of the water towards us, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
But I think people have jumped onto that. We forgive you. For the 80s and the 80s and the 90s, especially, and into the early noughties. I also think there's been a real change in people just expecting people are going to turn up.
Yeah, right.
And I think what we're observing is there is this real sense that the churches need to be really embedded in their local communities. People aren't going to travel to go to church as non-believers. They're just not. They just don't. So, and one of the advantages we have of being a small island is that I think we can plant churches in these cities and these communities where people don't have to drive long ways to get to church.
Right.
So I think there's a sense of, okay, how can we think smaller in order to reach wider? So I think that thinking in those terms that is helpful. I think the other thing that I think is important is to help people and help churches to figure out what does it really look like for us to live ordinary lives with a real intentionality to reach our neighbors missionally, because people aren't just going to walk into church. And by God's grace, it does happen.
Sure, yeah.
And it is happening because the Spirit's working. But just for us to see the opportunities that we have in an apparent dark landscape, that when God's people live as the community of light that we are, to help. So that seems a little bit up here as I'm talking, but I just think it's as simple as being people of faith, people of hope, people of joy, people of holiness, people devoted to the glory of God in light of the Bible, that I think is really real and authentic.
Yeah.
So if you're not engaging with your neighbor and they don't know that you're a Christian but you're friendly and you're kind and all those things which we want to be as a Christian, and then suddenly you're like, would you like to come to our men's evening where we're gonna, play football, and then some guy's gonna stand up and tell you that you need to put your trust in Jesus? They're probably not gonna come.
Right.
Some do, and I'm not knocking that. I'm not having a pop at those things and that, because I think they work and they're helpful. But I think we're moving in a context where what does it look like to equip people to live ordinary lives in light of the streets that they live for Christ with a real sense of priority. So I think that's something, but I think that what rolls out of that is the real heart and need to see more churches planted. So I think there was a wave of church planting that happened, and I think it was experienced here as well, wasn't it, over the last 25 years? I think that wave's died down a little bit. And as a result of that, less churches are being planted.
Right.
Less men are stepping up for pastoral ministry and wanting to be pastors. I see that with the numbers, and I know that from churches trying to even appoint guys to be assistant pastors are just struggling to fill those posts.
Right.
So I think there needs to be a real need in, okay, God has us where he has us. What does it look like to live as faithful Christians in this community?
Right.
Even in the midst of the hostility, he has us where he has us. And I think, how do we equip saints to do that well? Because that's ministry. Yeah. Do that well. And then, and actually be okay with the fact that we might not do everything in our buildings.
Right.
That is ministry. And then what does it look like for us as churches, whether we're 20 or whether we're 200 or 2,000, to have a real heart and desire to see churches planted.
Good.
So we don't plant churches just because we're full. We plant churches because that's what we're called to do.
That's good.
Yeah.
We don't just train men for ministry because you might have a guy saying, I'd like to do it. No, we actually, we do that because that's what it is to be a pastor.
That's right. Yeah.
To give unto faithful men so they can do likewise. To toil over the maturity of people in light of that. That's happening. Guys are doing that. But I also feel that we need to believe that God can do something.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think I can say this. I think I can.
Well, you definitely can.
Because you're about to.
I'm excited to hear.
Something I'm British is, I think we're risk averse.
Yes.
We're
Okay.
totally
Yeah.
risk averse. And for me, that's an oxymoron when it comes to being
God's people.
God's people.
That's right. Yeah.
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 And I think we need to take more risks.
Yeah.
I think we need to take more risks in the sense that we don't need enormous budgets to plant churches and do ministry.
Right.
I think we need to think about bivocational ministries as well.
Yeah.
In certain areas, whether that's right across the board, not just as pastors, but all sorts of ministry roles across the church in different ways. And we need to call the people to be risk averse with their own time, their own money, and their own things and service in order to continue to reach the UK with the gospel. So I don't really function in specific constructs. If we do this, this is going to work. If we do this, this is going to work.
Right.
I answer those questions with the biblical framework of, let's be the people of God that God has called us to be.
Right.
And serve and lead in the way that God has called us to serve and lead, whatever the cultural temperature we find ourselves in. And I think fruit comes from that.
It's good.
But to do that, we have to trust him.
That's right. Yeah.
And actually take that step of faith.
Yeah.
And be risky.
Yeah.
And be risky. And that might mean, I think one of the difficulties I think I see is that guys struggle to raise up elders.
Sure, yeah.
And I think often it's because they're waiting for sort of guys to walk in that have all their experience, and then what you do with them is just the finishing school for them to be elders. Well, that's not the case, especially if guys are getting saved in their 20s and 30s now with no grid whatsoever. So what does it look like for us to see men, especially any man that walks in, even the non-believing man that walks in and saying, okay, Lord, is this man going to be a pastor in this church?
Yeah.
And the heart is you want him to come to know the Lord Jesus, to be a child of God, and then you pour your life into him.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Paul didn't say to Timothy, wait till the guy walks through the door. He didn't say to Titus, wait till the guys come in and just finish it off. No, take these guys.
Yeah.
Pour into them. And I think we need, I say that because I think there's a risk element to that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not saying we appoint guys too quickly, and I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is pour into the people that God has put in front of us for the sake of ministry.
Yeah.
There are loads of ministries that are doing that and doing that really, really well. And I think we need to be doing that, especially in our middle class contexts.
Right.
Sort of more white collar contexts, as you guys would put it, where we've just got to take more risk with the people that we're seeking to raise up for ministry.
Yeah.
Which you know, I could talk about this all day long. That God has been so kind to me. He's given me a front row seat to watch him build his church in our context. And I'm so kind just to be able to see that. But just see the different men and different women, but men specifically for pastoral ministry from all different backgrounds, with all different messes, with all different issues. And that real diversity, that eclectic nature of what it is to be just different as human beings, as men. I think that's what we need to be thinking about in the UK more. Yeah. And be open and excited about the different opportunities on how we train, how we can do church. And when I say do church, because I know what that can sound like, when I say do church, it's do biblical church in the different contexts that we find ourselves in. Right. Let's go for it. Let's have a go. Yeah. And be excited by what God can do in the midst of the darkness. I'm really excited. You know, I'm 46. I'm thankful for the next, if the Lord spares me, another 30, 40 years in ministry, to see how bright the church can shine in the UK in the midst of this apparent darkness. I'm excited by that.
You know, you've preached at our church a number of times now, and one of the things I remember you sharing in a sermon, Steve, was you talked about you said it already in this podcast, mentioning, you know, the church can shine like shards, you know, in the midst of darkness. It's a very Pauline idea, right? Philippians 2, he talks about, as we hold fast to the word of life, we shine like stars in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. And so on the one hand, nobody's celebrating that things are getting darker. No one's celebrating that. What we're saying is, yes, it is bad. Things are getting dark, more secular, more liberal, less Christian. But as that happens, those who really are believers will shine brighter by contrast if, and this is the big if they continue to hold fast to the word of life. And the thing that you said in the sermon, which I thought was so helpful for our people to hear because it translates across all contexts, is the necessity of being comfortable with looking more and more distinct as the world sort of forgets, as the West forgets its Christian past, even if it was just culturally Christian. As people move further and further away from that, Christians are going to look stranger, sound stranger when we just articulate basic Christian beliefs. And I was so thankful for the way that you talked about that, because I think the temptation is to smooth off those rough edges and think, well, I'll never reach that person if he looks at me, knows what I believe about all these hot topics, and thinks, well, I could never do that. And so we think, well, we'll just not talk about those, or we'll change what we believe about that. We'll soften it a little bit, or we'll soften it whenever we talk about it, or anything like that. You know, in those moments, you're actually taking away the opportunity to do the very thing that Paul says you're supposed to do. You won't shine like stars in the midst of a dark, crooked, perverse generation if you're constantly trying to look more and more and more and more like the people that you're supposed to stand out from. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, you know, as you're speaking as well, other verses that come to mind in 2 Corinthians, where Paul says that as the church with the aroma of Christ to God, he looks at it as the smell of the church is the smell of his son. You know, he loves us. But for some, it's the stench of death. For others, it's the fragrance of life. And I think Piper puts it this way, that it's like that we have to be prepared as the church to be the wedge in humanity. We are the wedge in humanity as the church. The truth of the gospel and the wonder of who Jesus is an offense. So it's going to be the stench of death, for people. But it's also the words of eternal life, the beauty, the means by which people know God and grow to be truly human as our humanity is restored. Therefore is the fragrance of life. We have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
We always want to be the fragrance of life for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, we have secularization, we have people becoming liberal, we're wanting to be, and you've seen it over here as much as we're seeing it in all over the European continent. And we have to be comfortable with that. And that's risky for people. Of course it is. That's risky because we lose friends, we could lose jobs, and that's happening. All sorts of things can happen, but we want to do that and be that wedge in humanity in light of the fact that we are the aroma of Christ. J.C. Ryle was one of my heroes, first Bishop of Liverpool, legend. And it was said of J.C. Ryle after he died by Francis Chavas, who sort of preceded him as the next bishop. He said that J.C. Ryle was a man of, I'm going to get this wrong.
What's that? Yeah, you can look it up or we can paraphrase.
Yeah, we can paraphrase it. So, no, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Paraphrase, he was a man of steel.
Okay, yeah.
He was Superman.
He was Superman. He was a man of steel with the heart of a child.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah.
He was a man of steel with the heart of a child. And I think that's what we need to be. We need to be people of steel because of the truth of the gospel with hearts of children. Not in an immature way, but in a loving way. And I think I always love that. And as much as I said he's my hero and I can't even quote it right, but the reality is that sense of we need to be people, that wedge, a steel wedge.
Right.
With hearts like children, with hearts like the soft, hearts that are loving, hearts that are caring, hearts that actually seek to think well of even the people that we struggle to love.
Yeah, sure.
For the sake of the gospel. And I think we step into the darkness in that way and people.
And the Lord's still powerful to save. This is one thing I love about you guys' church, and I've been there many times, is you guys have seen this. Is, the perennial question is you always need to know what time it is, but it's always the time to be the church and be comfortable in our own skin. We know who we are in Christ. We know who the Lord is. And that's a great delight and a joy. And then also it leads us to have his heart for our neighbors, so that we're not waiting for past momentum or waiting for everybody to come to us. We're joyfully going to them and taking the initiative and caring for others, sharing the good news with others, all those sorts of, and you guys have seen hundreds baptized.
Yeah. And God's been so kind to us in that way. I think which I'm so thankful for, one of the challenges is because of everything we've just been saying of the people who are being saved. It's not just like kids who've grown up in the church, which we are seeing as well.
Sure.
It's like, it makes discipleship interesting.
That's right, yeah.
It makes it really interesting. That's the risk. It makes it interesting in the sense that how do we disciple these people that, the kids that are getting saved at 13, 14, 15, they've been catechized, they've got all this history coming in, and they draw all the dots. Okay, that's great. Now we can pour in. Yeah. Guys come in and goes, Jesus has saved me. I love him. Can I still sleep with my girlfriend? You know what I mean? Okay, how do we walk that through differently? And that's been a shift for lots of people. Right. And I'm not just talking in particular communities. I'm talking in the well-to-do middle-class communities of the churches that have been established for years, and they have certain patterns. The risk is, are we going to disciple differently?
Right.
How are we going to do that? What's discipleship look like? What does leadership development look like? What does it look like working with people who conventionally would probably not be being saved in our particular churches, but now they are.
That's right.
And that's exciting.
Yeah.
And there's a joy in that. There's a hope in that. There's a wonder, there's a risk in that. And I think we've got to step into those things.
Yeah, you mentioned, this the outflow of being biblical churches. Basically. So, and the church always has to assess what the scriptures teach, which is obviously us delighting in Christ, proclaiming the good news, and making disciples.
Yeah.
But the assumption is that in the scriptures is many of these folks don't know Him, and you're not assuming that they're starting further down the road. So you see that clearly in the scriptures. So it's only as we do church for a while that we constantly need to be wise and check our assumptions that we're being loving and most helpful and making disciples and meeting folks where they're at.
That's right.
So that they can actually grow up. And sometimes the church the older the churches get, the longer history and heritage, sometimes it's more difficult to kind of reassess, are we actually just being faithful to the scriptures that we love and what the Bible teaches? And we need to look at it with fresh eyes in order to actually accomplish the mission sometimes.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely, yeah. It's good stuff.
A lot more that can be said, a lot more we will say, but thankful for the time.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks, Steve.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Love you.